Hello and welcome to Demystifying Lace Class 4. Today we're going to be talking about charts. Now I wanted to do some demonstration for you today, but I got a little overzealous with some yard work and my doctor told me to lay off the hand. So I'm just going to be demonstrating with what I have here. So we're going to talk about charts. Most lace patterns these days come in charted form. Some come in, written directions where you get every single line written out. Some come in both. I think both is probably the best of both worlds because that makes it easier to spot mistakes. But charts are kind of, I don't want to say the way of the future, but they're definitely a more representational way of reading a pattern. So what is the deal with a chart exactly? A chart is just a stitch by stitch representation of everything you're going to be doing in a pattern. And sometimes you'll have differences in the number of stitches per row, and then you get this no stitch thing, and I'll explain that in just a sec. And sometimes you have some weird shaping going on. Now what a chart will do that written directions can't do is show you the structure of the finished fabric. What that means is that when you read, a whole line that might say, knit two together, yarn over, knit two together, yarn over, knit two together, knit one, work a noop, knit one, blah, blah, blah. You don't know that over that knit two together there, 2 rows up is supposed to be a yarn over because it doesn't really relate. But when you see it in a chart, you know that, okay, if I get to this point in my chart and this yarn over isn't above this one, I've made a mistake somewhere and I need to go back and fix it. Because that right there is an exact representation of this portion of the Baltic lace shawl. So you see this right here. This is actually upside down from how you'd be seeing the chart. But this portion right here is the outer edge, and this repeat is this section here. So you see every single stitch that you have to work in a piece when you have a chart. Now it's very important to read it properly. Charts are read bottoms up, and they're going to be read from left to right on the wrong side rows, right to left on right side rows. And in this case, all 3 that I'm showing you here are in the round, so they're all going to be read in that direction. So what you have here as well, and you'll get this with a lot of lace charts, is a repeat. And so in this row, and this happens to be, it starts right at the corner. This yarn over is right here, and then you move on to the next stitch. Actually, we're starting over here. Sorry, it's upside down. This yarn over is right here. Move on to the next stitch. You knit a few stitches, and then all of a sudden you have this repeat. What happens here is you have 16 stitches, or however many you have in your repeat for your particular chart, and you repeat it 13 times across the row. So it's 13 times this plus what you have on the ends. That actually equates to a row stitch count of 224 stitches right there. So what you probably want to do, and this is a really good idea anytime you're knitting lace or any kind of pattern where you have multiple repeats like this, put a stitch marker between every single repeat, because what will happen is you know that no matter what, in this repeat there are 16 stitches. And if you get to the end of a repeat and you say there's only 15, then you know it was in that repeat that you made a mistake and you can go back and fix it instead of getting to the next row and finding out, uh-oh, I made a mistake 2 rows down. So it's a really good idea to count every time you get to your next stitch marker and put one between every single repeat. And also in other places where marking corners, marking any place where you have increases in a pattern. It's just a good idea. It's a visual representation for you to see, oh wait, I got to think about this and do something here. And you do want to be a little bit careful in lace putting stitch markers in because they do tend to want to shift over yarn overs especially. They'll kind of slide around a little bit, so just keep an eye on them or use the smallest stitch markers you can find for the size of needle that you have. So let's talk about no stitch. I get a lot of questions about no stitch. It's actually one of my favorite things about charting because what no stitch is, it only exists in the world of charting. It's sort of like dividing, trying to get the square root of 1. It is imaginary. It does not exist. It only exists for the purpose of orienting a chart so that stitches are in the proper alignment. So this happens to be the chart for this lovely little honeybee on top of the sock. And as you can see here, even though this yarn over times 4 is, not exactly representational of what it looks like, this chart roughly looks like what the honeybee looks like. Now, if we were to take out the no stitches, this is what the chart would look like. And that is incredibly confusing because you can't really see how things line up. Even though both of these are technically correct, having the no stitch marks in there just allow you to say, okay, this is forming a diagonal line here, this is forming a diagonal line here, I see I pick everything up in the middle, okay, I get it. So that is really the purpose of a no stitch. It shows all these little empty spots where stitches had been but were decreased away. Now also they can represent stitches that aren't there yet. And that actually does happen in this chart where you start with 224 stitches across your row, and if you work the first row of this chart, it'll come out evenly. But in the next pattern row on round 3, you are increasing by 2 stitches on that round. And the only way to represent that there's 2 new stitches without making the pattern kind of bow out in a funny way is by leaving enough room in the chart to say, well, the maximum number of stitches that are going to happen in this row is 244. So this chart needs to represent 244 stitches, not only 224. So each one of these little no stitch boxes, you just disregard it because a stitch will be there eventually, but it's not there yet. So when you see a no stitch box, you move, say, from this yarn over immediately into this SSK. So just pretend they're not even there. Because what happens here, as you can see, it's kind of like a 45-degree angle. That is this 45-degree angle right here. So one thing that I like to do when I'm doing charts, and this sounds a little bit weird, but especially charts for stuffed animals, anything that has a lot of shaping, I'll actually cut out all the no-stitch boxes and fold it to make sure it's the proper dimensions. And if it works out, then that's the proper orientation of the chart. So this really is just a tool to help you understand where things are lining up in your chart. So if you come to no stitch, it literally is no stitch. It is in the void. It doesn't exist. You do nothing except for move on to the next box. Now when you're reading a chart, if you've never used a chart before, understand that in the round, everything you're looking at is from the right side. When you're working flat, you've got kind of 2 sets of directions. So you have to kind of understand what you're looking at. Now, when you look at these white boxes that just says knit, all of these charts here are in the round. So it kind of doesn't apply to anything here. But if you're working flat and you see that this is all knit, you know it's stockinette, so you know on the row going back, you want a purl. If you see purl bumps on the wrong side rows of a flat piece, that's actually knit, because the direction for purl when you're looking at it from the front is to purl, but it's working from the back, so you're actually knitting. So read your legend very carefully, understand what your fabric is supposed to look like, whether it's on a ground of stockinette or garter stitch. I prefer stockinette myself. I think I can see it a little bit better. So in this case, all of these are stockinette. And read your chart carefully first before you start doing anything. Read all of your repeat instructions, any other instructions that come with that chart that might be specific to that chart. In this case, every single one of these little triangles is a pickup direction, and they all happen at the same time. And you wouldn't know that unless you read the directions with this chart. So be very careful when you're reading your charts. Make sure you know what all your stitches are before you start. And once you get the hang of reading a chart, you'll never want to go back, because being able to essentially see that, oh, okay, that is supposed to look exactly like this. And if it doesn't end up looking like that, I think I've made a mistake somewhere. It's a wonderful representation of what you're going to be doing in your final lace project. So become one with the charts. You'll be very happy you did.